Hola Comadres, welcome to another episode of Comadreando podcast. I'm your host Marcy, and today we have an amazing guest, Johanna, and I will let her introduce herself. Who are you?
Hi everybody, my name is Johanna Ferreira. I'm a journalist and an editor, and I currently work as the content director for Pop Sugar's Latine vertical, Juntos. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to have you. I'm so excited. I've seen you on other shows and I'm like, she should be on my show, right? So Joanna and I connected. I think it was like a Pop Sugar article, and also through Claudia Mendoza, who's the leader of Mami Chula Social Club. So we started following each other a couple of years ago, and I was just like so geeked. I'm like, wow, she's doing it. She's Dominican. Like, she's doing this thing of like journalistic, following your journalistic endeavors, but also like talking about stories that are not often talked about in Latine Media. So today's topic, going into that vein, we're going to be talking about the importance of representation of Latinos in the media. And the reason why the topic came up, because as a kid, I really didn't see my perspective represented in Latine media, especially growing up as an immigrant kid coming from Dominican Republic. Yes, I came at a young age. However, I feel like the people that were represented on Univision, on Telemundo, nobody really looked like me or had the same story that I had. So I'm really, really proud of having Joanna out there doing what she's doing, and shedding light on stories that are not usually shed light on, if that makes any sense. So before we get into the other questions, just your profession is journalism. Do you do anything else? And also, what made you pursue that?
So it's funny because I feel like for a lot of people, they kind of learn that they're writers when they're older. I learned at a really young age that I was a writer because it was the way that I communicated with my parents whenever I was disciplined. I've shared this on other podcasts where I wasn't able to articulate my feelings when it came to the discipline. I feel like from a really young age, I really resented machismo. I didn't understand what it was, even though I did learn the word early because my mom did educate me about it. But I don't think folks realized that they were I don't think the women in my family realized that in some ways they had internalized machismo. And there was a lot of walking on eggshells around men and just making sure that you were on your best behavior so that you wouldn't trigger men or upset men or hurt men's egos. And I was too young to really understand that and have language around that. But I just remember as a kid being a little angry when I noticed it, and being really angry whenever my grandfathers would tell me I couldn't do something because I was a girl. Also, I grew up in a really kind of strict Christian Dominican upbringing. So I didn't always agree with the discipline. And I do feel like my parents did raise us in a really healthy environment, and they did the best that they could. But I didn't always agree with the discipline. So when I couldn't articulate that and I just felt angry, I would just write them letters, sneak it underneath their door at night when they were sleeping. They would read it in the morning. I was such an intense kid. I remember in the morning, getting ready for school, just wondering, did they see it? Did they read it? What are they going to say? And then I'd always get an apology. And I didn't necessarily need the apology. I didn't need to be right. They didn't always tell me I was right. They would be I'm sorry if this hurt your feelings. I'm sorry if I was too harsh or whatever. This is why we disciplined you this way. But thank you for bringing this up because we didn't know that this hurt you so much. So I think that's when I started understanding the power of writing, the power of journaling, and just getting your thoughts out on paper. And because for me, that was a process. That was a comprehension process. So I think from then I knew I was a writer. And then a lot of my teachers in school would tell me that because I always aced any writing assignments and I loved doing book reports. I loved doing essays and stuff like that. But it was in college where I realized that this was what I wanted to pursue as a career. I was initially a marketing major and I thought it was like boring as hell. I'm not a business person. I feel like at some point I'm going to take business classes because I'm such a stereotypical creative that, like, you know, people have told me, like, to some extent I am good at business because
Yeah.
that you kind of have to be when you're in media.
Mm-hmm.
Because to a certain extent, you do work with sales and marketing. But I feel like I could be savvier because for me, it's always like the story and like the creative part of it that appeals to me more. But I basically went into journalism because I actually wanted to be like a music journalist or an arts critic. That's what I wrote about
Got
in
it.
school paper in college. And I had a professor who passed away. His name's Michelle Marriott. And he was like, you are so passionate when it comes to talking about your community and like, you know, being a Latina and like the frustrations you experience in your community and the lack. I was literally that person that was like always bitching about these things in college. And I was like, I'm not supporting that magazine because they only put white people on the cover. Like that, that was
Yeah.
literally me in college. And he was like, so why don't you go into women's lifestyle? Like, why don't you like be the change? And I've said this on another podcast. I initially thought that that was like really poor advice. I was like, really? Like, you know, that doesn't make any sense. I'm one person. But I do feel like it allowed me to kind of hone in on what I wanted to do, which was to storytell for our community and very specifically from like the Latina lens. And, you know, it was really hard in the beginning. I think, you know, I see it with all my colleagues, all my Latina journalist peers. Like it was definitely really hard in the beginning, even if you worked in Latin media, because a lot of Latin media sites or verticals are still owned by white people.
Yeah.
And also, brands didn't want to advertise around certain content when I was starting. And I think over the years, I think brands, media companies have really recognized the value in creating content and doing storytelling for our community. I mean, we're going to be the majority demographic in 2060. I don't know why people are sleeping on that.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're sleeping on that. I feel like Latinos themselves are kind of sleeping on that. And I always say this, I feel like the Black community has been so much better at uniting and mobilizing. It doesn't matter if you're Black American, Black Caribbean, from Africa, East African, West African. I feel like the Black community has always been really good at that. And I feel like for Latinos, it's always been kind of difficult because we're really different. Like the only thing we really have in common is our Latinidad. Like culturally, we're different. Racially, some of us are different. I mean, there's certain things I have more in common with the West Indian than I do with a Latina from South America. You know, but at the same time, I feel like it's been so unfortunate because yes, we have differences. Yes, some of us have more privileges than others. Yes, you know, we might have different political views, but at the end of the day, if we mobilized and we focused more on how we can work together, I think we would get a lot farther across industries. We're going to be the majority demographic. Like, I don't know how many times I have to say that. We're like some of the biggest consumers in the United States. Like we play such a huge part in the economy. Like there's so much power in being a Latino living in the States. And I feel like we need to start like taking advantage of that.
I feel through my experiences, like there's a lot of division and I see that a lot. And not only in the media, but also even, you know, when we see each other like on a day-to-day basis in different companies or whatever, I feel like the people that are in closer proximity to whiteness are very like there's like I don't know there's a thing like it's this divisiveness that exists and there's not that sense of community because like I feel like you said like the Black community doesn't matter where you come from, you're Black, you identify as Black, and like we're all gonna come together and we're gonna, you know, come together for different purposes. But I feel like in Latinidad there's a lot of well, that's not my experience, you know, And I get that, but also, listening to other people's voices and validating that is important
100%.
as well.
And I feel like if that's not your experience, the more reason why you should be supporting folks who are less privileged than you within the community. That's always been my whole take. Like, I'm Dominican, I identify as Afro Latina. Both my parents are Dominicans of African descent. There's no denying that. I feel like I've always known that growing up. My mom was always very vocal about that. And even so, I know that there's still privileges that I've experienced as a Latina in comparison to some of my Dominican or Latina friends who are more Black presenting or darker skin or have, tighter curls. And even outside of race, like even economically, like my parents are both college educated. My dad's a dentist. I grew up middle class. I don't feel like if anything, I feel like we should be supporting each other more if we have privileges. Like, use your privilege to get people in the rooms. You know what I mean? Like, use your privilege to build teams, to give people opportunities. This whole, like, that hasn't been my experience. When I hear that, I'm like, all right, why are you even telling me that? Like,
exactly.
What am I supposed to do with that information? So because that's not your experience, what does that mean?
They want to invalidate your story, and that's not how it works. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes the folks that say like that hasn't been my experience, I do feel like there's a fear that folks in the Latino community that have been quote unquote more oppressed or have struggled more are going to be like the main narrative when it comes to Latinidad. That's not happening. It's never happened. It's still currently not the situation. Like, that's not happening. Let's be honest. The more privileged you are, the more focused your stories still are today. You know what I mean? Like, and also that shouldn't, like, I feel like we shouldn't be afraid of passing the mic. You know what I mean? Like, if one demographic within Latinidad has gotten more shine at some point, you should be okay with passing the mic to other communities that haven't before, right? Like, I am very comfortable doing that. The Dominican community has had maybe 1 second of shine right now, right? Like, we're seeing Dominicans in film and television. We're seeing more like Dominicans outside of like merengue and bachata industry,
and outside of baseball.
And outside of baseball, getting a little bit more shine. We're seeing more stories highlighting Dominican experiences. But it's been 1 second, everybody. Like, I hear it where they're like, Dominicans are all over the place. No, we're not. My Dominican friends that live in LA are still not even acknowledged as Latine in LA. They speak Spanish and people look at them like they're aliens. So it's like, everybody needs to pipe down. With that said, I still see Dominicans highlighting other stories. Like, as a director, I'm always concerned, like, is my content balanced? Like, are there enough like South American stories here? Is there enough content here that like makes Central Americans feel seen or whatever? And I always say this, I feel like Central Americans get no kind of recognition. I have friends that are Guatemalan. I also have even South Americans. Like, I feel like Ecuadorians get no kind of recognition. And I'm always thinking about that when I'm creating content. So I think this needs to be less about like who gets to be the face of things and like, and more about like, how can we just like collect and mobilize and uplift each other? You know what I mean?
As a collective.
This is not a competition. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And another thing is like, I've always been the one to be like, we can all shine. Like, it doesn't have to be like, well, I am taking the what is it, the spotlight right now, and that means nobody else has anything important to contribute. And that is not the case. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can be in the spotlight and you can have your own spotlight as well. Like, it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
That's a very, I can't even like fully judge it because that fear is very common for all marginalized communities, right? Like, if you are a person of color or you come from any marginalized community, you're used to being the only one representing your community, whether it's at jobs or, you know, whatever it is. And I feel like once upon a time it was like, yo, we're that one Latina higher and that's it. But I feel like that's not where we're at anymore. And if anything, if you're that one Latina higher, you are probably burnt out and overwhelmed because there's no way you can do it all. And there's no way you can represent all these different experiences and voices, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we need to kind of move away from that old school mentality of like, I'm here. We don't need any other Latinas in this space. And I think we need to be collaborating a lot more. I say that all the time.
I agree. I love that story about your childhood, about how you would write letters to your parents to voice your concerns or whatever. That is so powerful in and of itself. And the fact that your parents acknowledged it and were like, wow, our bad. I mean, even if they didn't say my bad, but like saying like, we feel bad that you felt bad or whatever. That's so big because I feel like growing up, a lot of it was like kids to be seen and not heard. So the fact that you were able to get your story out there, even if, yes, you did get in trouble, quote unquote, but like them listening to you was so big. And I feel like, I'm sure your relationship now with your parents has changed. Like,
oh yeah, like I'm like best friends with my parents. Like I love my viejos. I was just talking to my mom today. I feel like I just kind of talk to them about anything. And I feel like, I'll be honest, I do think that, my parents had to kind of like evolve with age. I think parenting does that. It's funny because they, I'm always talking about like having a child-free life because I'm trying to normalize that for people. But there's this narrative that people that don't have kids stay young. And in some ways, yes, but I think having kids in other ways keeps you young too, because you're learning from the younger generations.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if my parents would even think the way that they think today if they didn't have kids, because we've challenged them in so many ways. But yeah, I'm definitely grateful because I wouldn't be the person I am today if I wasn't given the space to like verbalize and, advocate for myself. I basically have been advocating for myself since I was like 5.
I love that though. I feel like, there was a book that I got my hands on when I was young, and it was like the Diary of something. It wasn't the Wimpy Kid because this was way before, like I want to say like late 80s, early 90s. But that book inspired me to journal write because that wasn't a thing in my household. And I feel like my experience as a Dominican is a little different than other people because, like your parents, my mom was educated as well. So I can't fully represent stories of people that their parents didn't go to school. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a different experience. However, I feel like advocating for myself did come a little easier, especially because I was the oldest. I was the one like, rompiendo barreras, like breaking down stereotypes and like exposing my mom to different things. Cause like she wasn't.
Can we talk?
She was educated.
Can we talk about that for a second? Like I would.
Yeah.
I know you're the host, but I would love to hear your thoughts on being the eldest of like immigrant parents. Cause I feel like if you're not, you don't get the pressure that it comes with. Like in many ways, we're the ones breaking the generational curses.
Yes.
No?
100%. I feel like I wasn't as wild as my brothers were. Like my brothers did a lot, but I feel like just softening my mom up to other perspectives, like I did that a lot. And as the oldest child, you go through so much. Like you have to be the cultural broker. You have to be, basically translator, for your parent. My mom eventually ended up learning English because she was a teacher before she came from Dominican Republic. But when she got here, because she did like a trade school for teachers, they didn't recognize it as a 4-year college. So she had to do everything all over again. So basically we were both in school together.
Wow.
When I was in high school, she was doing her undergrad. And then when I went to college, she was finishing her, what is it called? Her master's degree in education.
Amazing.
So, I'm typing up my college papers and I'm helping her as well. So it's like, I feel like there's so much pressure as a firstborn, especially, being the cultural broker and then exposing your parents to different things. Like I remember during the pandemic, yes, my mom has been a teacher for like 25 plus years. However, she wasn't like savvy with technology. So I had to like do that as well, like for my teachers in the building as well as her, and I feel like because I've been teaching her and exposing her to different things throughout my entire life, it was easier for her to pick certain things up than other people that I see that come here to this country and are younger than her. Right. So I feel like also it also, I feel like your parents and my mom, I want to say that because they have a more open mind to certain things, it's easier, but it was still difficult. Yeah. I feel like me showing up to appointments and being like, well, here I am, my 8-year-old self translating for my mom as accurately as I could. Because yes, I knew a lot of Spanish and I knew a lot of English. However, I feel like the level of English wasn't matching like the scenario that was happening at that moment. So yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. I feel like our stories aren't highlighted as much, and I feel like because we're the oldest, it just like it gets not swept under the rug, or like I feel like more taken for granted.
I think so too, and even our stories are different. I remember when I interviewed Claudia, the creator of Claudia Ferreira, the creator of the Gordita Chronicles. And I remember, like, even though I'm not a Miami Dominican, I'm a New York Dominican, there was a lot of her experience that, like, resonated with me. And, like, for me, like, one of the pressures that I've experienced being a Dominican American is, like, because my dad was successful, my dad was a dentist, till this day, I'm always like, I got to be more successful than Papi. I still don't make as much money. Like, I don't own property like Papi. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think people realize that, like, when your parents do make it, there's no excuse for you not to. It's a different kind of pressure than when you're, like, the first one to go to college or the first one to pursue a career. That is pressure for sure, but it's a different type of pressure that I try to verbalize and talk about more now, because for a lot of my friends that are the first ones to have gone to college and the first ones to pursue their dreams, I'm like, you'll talk to me because what I went through, your kid's probably going to go through. You know what I mean? Because, like, they have you as a mom, you know, who's like this entrepreneur and successful and all this stuff. They're going to want to at least level up to you. And I feel like our communities are only now just hearing those type of perspectives.
Yeah. You know? I remember mom, she had us 3. So it was me and my 2 younger brothers. And she's doing her master's degree, straight A student. I'm like, how slay? And then she's looking at me like, Dime, like, why your grades are not like my grades? I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I have other things going on in my life besides that. Like, she's like, ¿y qué? Yo tengo ni entre muchacho, yo lo hice. ¿Por qué tú no lo puedes hacer? And I'm like, okay, your brain is better than mine. Like, I cannot, like, multitask. I feel like undiagnosed. I feel like I have ADHD.
Me too.
Because I'm like, I can't do everything at the same time, even though I do try, but then there's always, like, an area that's, like, not as well put out as other things. So it's like, you know, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm not as great as you are. You're fantastic.
I about that all the time. I'm like, Mom, how did you have, like, 3 kids? Like, you know, I'm 37. My mom had all 3 kids, I think, by the time she was, like, 31, 32. Running a house. I'm like, she used to work out. Like, she was involved in so many things, like supported my dad's practice. Like, at one point was like managing my dad's practice, but was like involved in the PTA. Still managed to always look fly too. Like, nails done, everything. I was like, I feel like I would be rolling out of bed. If I was doing all that, I'd be looking like homeless. Like, I'm like, no, how did you do it? Like, I'm not wired to do all of that.
When I see my friends with more than one child, like, I have one and he's on the spectrum, and I'm like,
how old is he?
I feel like he's 15 now, but like at one point I was just like barely like I was like, like, you know, just barely like hanging on, and then I got into the swing of it, and I figured it out, and I feel like I'm able to manage all these things I do. So, you know, I run a podcast. I have a full-time job. I'm the mom. I'm part of a women's social club, like an active member. I do all these things. I edit my episodes. I do all these things myself, but it has taken time and practice, and also like prioritizing myself. There was a moment that my mom like was like, you're so preoccupied with everything that's going on in your life that whatever, like she was like trying to like criticize, like she's like, oh, I don't see you as such a dedicated mother. I'm like, bitch, first of all,
hell no.
I was like, bitch, first of all, no, that's not true. Like I can be a mom, like a fully dedicated mom. Like every day I'm preparing my son's lunch. Like he takes hot lunch every day to school. I do these things, you know what I'm saying? But the thing is, like, it's not enough for me to just be a mom.
Right. I think
I can't do that.
Of this generation feel that way.
I 100% cannot do that. I cannot just like dedicate myself just to be like a full, like just a mom and that's enough for me. Like I wouldn't feel fulfilled as a human being, let alone a woman, just doing that. And I'm going to be 100% transparent with you.
Think about it. I really feel, despite what some folks think and despite what Republicans and conservatives think, I really think that men and women are a lot more similar than we realize. When have you ever met a man who's content just being a father? And I know stay-at-home fathers exist, but they're very, very few, right? Because that's not enough. So I think it's only natural that as women, we want to be more than just mothers. You know what I mean?
And I love my son, and I would like, if I had to like sacrifice a limb or whatever for my child, I would do that. However, I 100% do not feel fully satisfied just being a mother, because I feel like I'm wasting potential. Like I was given gifts, I came with gifts. Like me not living up to that potential doesn't make me feel good.
Also, your son is seeing you living up to your potential. He's witnessing.
Yeah. And then, like, what kind of example would I be for him if I wasn't doing the most? You know what I'm saying? Like, how would I push him to do more as an autistic person without showing him what it can be, like multitasking and doing all these other things. So, I mean, he doesn't have to do everything that I do, obviously. Right. However, but like you can't do that as well. And not on some like, well, I did this and you have to do this. It's more like, oh, wow, I grew up, man. I saw my mom doing this. I think I can do this too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I said I love that. I love that mentality.
I was going to say, so you grew up here. Did you grow up in Manhattan or the Bronx or where?
No, I'm a Queens Dominican. I grew up in Queens. It's hard to like rep one part of Queens because we lived everywhere. Yeah. Like my parents, when they migrated from DR, they went to Corona back when Corona was mostly Dominican. It's not anymore. There's like little patches. Yeah. So I first grew up in Corona. Then we lived in Queens Village. Then we lived for like 5 minutes in a white neighborhood. We were in Belrose. And I always tell my parents, because they're always like, we're so sad that we didn't raise you guys there. And we're all like, no, we're so glad that we moved, because
I know
I was already going through it. I remember like growing up only around, not only, but mostly around Latinos, to then move to a predominantly white neighborhood where the kids were like, what's Dominican? What is that? Like, I was like, get me out of here. Get me out of here. I was hanging out with all the Indian kids because they were the only like non-white.
Like brown people.
The only brown people. And then I'd say I mostly grew up in Flushing.
Okay.
From like, I think I was like in 7th grade when we bought the house in Flushing. So from like 7th grade until adulthood, I grew up in Flushing, which I still love Flushing. My parents still live in Flushing. It was like the most diverse neighborhood we lived in. Like, school, like my friends were Asian, they were Latino, like they were Black, they were Italian, they were Jewish, they were Greek. Like I still fuck with Flushing.
Yeah. I feel like people that are not from New York that listen to the show, they're gonna be like, what does that even mean? It's like so New York is like, in and of itself, it's like so many little like microcosms of different people, and where you grew up, it's very like, it influences how you are as a Dominican. Not that it's going to change your culture, but how you see the world is a little different. Totally. So like my cousins that are from Long Island, who grew up in Long Island and now live in Queens, they're like a completely, like they had a different experience than me growing up in a predominantly Dominican neighborhood, going to school in elementary through like middle school here in the Heights, and then becoming basically like a Harlem Dominican. Like I feel like I represent Harlem more because I did my high schooling there. I did my undergrad there, and then like in my master's degree as well. I was in Harlem most of the time, and I feel like I honestly like I feel like I have a special place in my heart for Harlem rather than the Heights. Like not that I don't like the Heights. Obviously, I live here still, but I feel like the culture in Harlem's a little bit more my pace or my style.
I could see that because there's a lot I love and I appreciate about Washington Heights. But as a Queens Dominican, I go to the Heights and there's just like a certain level of energy I have to have. Whenever I'm like going to the Heights, where I feel like Harlem, I lived in Harlem for like 5 months because then the pandemic came. There's like a chillness to Harlem.
Yes.
They're really
even on the west side, like where like most Latinos are, like it's a completely different vibe. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. It's just I have a special place in my heart for Harlem. But yeah, no, like when you grow up here in the city, it definitely influences your experience of Dominicanness and Latinidad that not other cultures experience. So like here in the Heights now, it's a lot of people from, I want to say a lot of Mexican people, a lot of Dominicans still, and actually a lot of Ecuadorians as well. But growing up, it was like straight up just Dominicans and Puerto Ricans up here. So it's a different experience now than it used to be before. And even like Cuban people too. We had a lot of Cuban people living in the neighborhood. But I feel like my exposure to other cultures was more when I went to high school, there was we didn't have a lot of African American people living up here. But like when I went to high school, it was like, I was seeing more Black people. But then I went to college, Pace University, and it was almost like a mini Queens. A lot of people that were going to Pace were from Queens.
Pace upstate.
Pace downtown in by the the World Trade Center is. But yeah, it was that was like my eye opening. I was like, oh, there's people from all over the world here, and learning different cultures, which was very interesting as well.
I think that's one of the coolest things about being a New York Dominican is like you said, like you could be from Queens or Uptown and have a totally different experience. But I feel like growing up, because Dominicans are funny, like there's so much like strange competition around being Dominican enough. I think Latinos in general kind of do this to each other.
Yeah.
So I definitely like envied Uptown Dominicans when I was younger because I was like, oh, like I'm not Dominican enough. And like I grew up with like Filipinos and Puerto Ricans. But I actually like, I think there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Yeah,
in our
definitely
upbringings, for sure.
It's funny for me because when I meet a Dominican that's from the campo, like my family, I feel like we relate on a different level than other people from other parts of the country. So it's like, I'm like, we have these little like sayings and these little like asides or whatever that not everybody takes part in. So it's interesting how to connect in that way as well.
Yeah.
So besides writing your parents these beautiful letters, like letting them know exactly like how they messed up or whatever, what other inspiration to write did you have as a kid? Were you like a big reader or what was your experience with that?
I was a big reader. I loved reading books and I was really into magazines. But I felt frustrated because I felt like a lot of the text we were reading in school was like mostly like white protagonists. And every now and then there would be like a Latina author, but never Dominican. I think I started to slowly realize that I could be a writer when I got introduced to Julia Alvarez.
Yeah.
And I read In the Time of the Butterflies. I remember when I saw the movie, I was like kind of pissed too because nobody in the cast was Dominican. And I was like, why does media act like we don't exist? Like we're not a real community, that you can't even cast like real Dominicans in the film. So I think it kind of slowly started there and then it just kind of gradually built by the time I was in college. It's funny because, like I said earlier, I didn't go into media. I think a lot of Latinos that go into niche media, that wasn't like necessarily our plan, right?
Yeah.
I think we just wanted to tell stories, and we wanted to tell stories that reflected our own experiences. I don't think we all went into it necessarily wanting to oversee like Latino initiatives. But I feel like mainstream media has been so behind in figuring out how to integrate brown and black experiences on a mainstream level, which is why these initiatives still exist and are still important, because we're still, even when we are, it's not enough. Like, we're still not considered the mainstream. When we do see those stories, it's so few and far in between that I think initiatives like Somos, like Juntos, even like Latine owned properties like Remezcla, I feel like as a community, we still fuck with it because it really makes us feel seen on another level, but also like the content is just for us. There's something about that. When you grow up and like your favorite films and like your favorite actors and your favorite books, none of it spoke to your experience. For you to find initiatives that are completely dedicated to you and your experience, like it makes you feel seen, but it also makes you feel like kind of special.
Yeah,
You know what
it
I
does.
mean? And then also the engagement and the community aspect of these initiatives, right? Like, even if it's simply like a social handle, even like what you're doing with this podcast, like being able to find content that you're like, oh my God, like maybe that wasn't entirely my experience, but like I relate to that. Or like, I'm not the only one. Or, you know what I mean? I feel like it humanizes us. Because when
Yeah.
you grow up, even if you grow up around other Dominicans like we did, or other Latinos, when you don't see yourself on things that are considered important, films, politicians, our government, leadership, media, articles, magazines, books, etc. When you don't see that, there is a part of you that feels like, even though you're an American,
You don't belong.
I'm not really that American. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really belong. I'm still other. And I think that's why so many Latino storytellers, including yourself, go into this, because we're like, nah, like, stop it. We're just as
Yeah.
American as everybody else here. You know what I mean? We contribute to the culture. You know how cool it is when I meet somebody that's not Dominican and like they listen to like bachata, like the old
Yeah.
stuff. Like, it's not Romeo. Like, they listen to like Frank Reyes, and they're like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's cool. Like, we created that. We created that so that you can have access to that being outside of the Dominican community.
Yeah.
Like, Dominicans have created culture in the States, and I think we deserve to have that acknowledged and celebrated.
Yeah, and the representation is so important, especially like the platform that I chose is like, yes, I'm, representing Dominicanness, but like I want other parents that are Latino to feel represented in the special education community as well. Like, all of these things that are put out, like, our stories are not being highlighted. So I feel like highlighting Black and brown people on my platform is helping people feel seen, and like also like helping other parents see like, okay, I'm not the only one that has a child with autism. Because I feel like even then, like, besides the month of April where like Univision does like maybe one or two, or Telemundo does a couple of articles about kids that are on the spectrum that are Latino, a lot of parents don't feel like they're getting the support or that they have the resources. So I feel like offering this platform for that is making a bigger difference than that I can grasp at the moment.
100%. And I love that you're doing that, because I feel like, aside from the lack of resources and support, there's so much stigma with that. There's, especially in our communities. Like, I mean, I grew up hearing like the craziest shit when it came to mental health, right? Everything was like locura or abnormal. Like, everything was like an abnormality, right? Like,
Yeah.
instead of recognizing that so many of us do have disabilities to a certain extent, and that doesn't mean that we can't like thrive. Like I said, I think I'm ADHD undiagnosed, right? Like I'm not, I'm doing things with my life, and I'm there's so many people in my life too that I'm meeting that I would have never thought that they have autism, and they're getting the diagnoses now as adults.
Wow.
Right. I think COVID did a lot for people in terms of just really looking within and building like self-awareness. And to me, like, I love that people are doing that because I think it's normalizing this. And also with autism, it's a very wide spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes for people.
Yeah. For example, still like to this day, like some parents, I know some people like close to me that they recently got a referral from a teacher. They were concerned about their child's development. And even like they're younger than we are, they're like having such a hard time accepting the fact that their child is on the spectrum, and they got all the reports and all these things, and the doctors are like confirming, but then they're like, no, no, that's I disagree. They're not showing a true picture of my child, and I'm like, I understand that, but also like your idea of autism isn't necessarily the picture, the full spectrum of what you've seen. Like your child is still your child. It's just that they're neurodiverse,
Right.
and they're gonna learn and need supports in different ways. And I feel like as Latina people, we need to accept like our children's diagnoses and also support them and get them what they need. Because like us being in denial, it doesn't hurt us. Like, yes, you're gonna feel better internally because your child, quote unquote, doesn't have a label, but you're harming your child in the long run.
100%. It's a disservice to them because you're not getting them the resources and the support that they need to thrive having that. Yeah, that's why I think it's great you're really bringing more awareness around that.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask you. So so obviously you were a writer and you used to write letters, but what made you get into journalistic writing per se? Because like you could have been like a literary writer or short stories or whatever the case may be.
It took me a while. That's why I was initially a business major. It took me a while to think that I could make a career out of writing. I knew writers existed, but I always kind of assumed that, they must have had some type of leg up, or either were just like brilliantly talented and that's how they got in. So it just didn't seem feasible. I don't come from a family of creatives. I come from a family of, doctors, lawyers, business people, teachers, right? People had professions that, seemed stable to a certain extent. Nobody was out there pursuing careers in the arts. Right.
Yeah.
My family, I think I'm probably the first one in my family that like made a career out of it. And so like I didn't really know how to do it. And it was in college where a couple of it was like not one, it was like a few professors that were like, there's a journalism program. I went to Baruch. And it's funny because I got into Pace. I got into Fordham. I got into St. John's. So I got into other schools that also had business and media. I went for Baruch because my dad told me if I did CUNY, he was going to pay for like my entire education. So I wasn't going to have student loans. And I was like, that seems like a smart decision. And my professors were like, there's a journalism program here. Like you should switch over. And I was like, what does that like mean in terms of getting work? I graduated during the recession. I graduated in 2009 when media sank. So I just took a risk. I knew I was like switching at a terrible time. I knew that there was like no guarantee I was going to get a job. During college, I didn't even do the good internships until after I graduated because
oh my God,
during college, I was like still like figuring it out. So like I interned at a lot of like indie music and arts magazines that no longer exist. Cause I was like, I'm kind of still like that till this day where like, when I'm trying something out, I kind of like to start from like the bottom.
Like grassroots.
Really like to, and I just felt like if I start like at some indie shit, they're going to treat me like an editor and I'm going to get like the full education. And in many ways it did, because you intern at like magazines. Like when I interned after graduation, I interned at like Self Magazine, which is Condé Nast. I was at InStyle, which back then was Time Inc. Those internships were great, but like I barely wrote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You do more, you learn more the process and the administrative. You get a lot of people coffee. Whereas like my undergraduate internships, like I was writing, I was doing columns, I was interviewing music artists and visual artists. So I don't regret anything. I think everything had to happen the way that it happened, but it definitely, I always say I'm a late bloomer because it definitely took me a while to figure it out and realize like I could make a career out of this.
I love that.
Yeah.
So do you remember the first time you picked up, you told me the first time you picked up a book was when you saw Julia Alvarez. You felt like that was a mirror to your experience here?
That was the first time I read a book by a Dominican author, and I felt, you know, I don't know if it was a mirror, but I definitely felt like, it's weird, like I was saying before, I felt like I exist, right?
Yeah.
I felt seen when I read that. And it was also cool too, because I remember growing up and like my grandparents lived during the Trujillo regime, and I used to hear stories about it. So I was like, oh my God, our history is being told. But in terms of magazines and media, I didn't feel any type of representation outside of Latina Magazine, which is why I really wanted to work there. And I did want interning there. I never worked there like full time. They didn't have jobs available. But a lot of my managers that oversaw me when I was there, they're still my friends and mentors today. And they helped me get a lot of my, I'd say they helped me get a majority of my jobs after that.
I love that. I remember growing up, I was a reader, like heavy reader. So I used to read a lot of magazines. I used to read a lot of articles. I used to read, short stories, literature, whatever. And I did read In the Time of the Butterflies, but when I really felt seen was like the first time I picked up one of Junot Diaz's books.
Oh yeah, that's right.
With all the little Dominicanisms, I was like, oh my God, this is me. And yes, he was like
another realm.
Like it was a completely different realm. And I did do like a stint of like, not a stint, but like a time where I was reading a lot of like contemporary Latin American authors, and I was like, wow, this is great. But then I didn't feel myself, like I didn't feel like my stories are being represented. And when I picked up Junot Diaz, I was like, wow, this is it. Like this, if I were to write a book, this is what I want to, bring forth and like show. And then the fact that it was in English, but he had a lot of like little words in Spanish that he translated for people. So I felt like that was dope. But I feel like I used to read a lot of YM magazine, and I did pick up Latina, and still like, a lot of the stuff was like cool, but I didn't feel represented.
There was a lot missing, but like I feel like when I was younger, I was a lot more critical. Like I remember I went to Latina because I was like, this is cool, but it still feels like it's only kind of telling one Latina experience.
Yeah.
It definitely didn't feel Dominican. Mm-hmm. But now looking back, especially working in this industry, I'm definitely less critical because I do feel like, it's the power, it's people in leadership, like I think every Latina person that's working in media, I can tell you because I know a lot of them, I think everybody's doing the best they can with what they're being given.
Yep.
100%. Can we be doing more? Absolutely. But like, you can't do more if you lack resources.
Yeah.
So I think everybody's doing the best that they can, which is why I appreciate podcasts like yours and why I've been a lot more open and flexible about being on podcasts, because I do think people need to understand what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And then, that's another thing. Like, I appreciate everything that is being done, because at the end of the day, like looking back at our experience, like growing up, it's completely different. Like I can pick up a storybook and have a Dominican author write the book and like show stories of kids. Like my favorite book right now that I read to my students is Platanos Go With Everything.
Oh yeah, we spoke about that.
I freaking love that book, and she's such a great artist. I actually had her on the show, and she's like phenomenal. She's phenomenal. And then the thing is, like, I feel like going from that of like being able to read to my students and like show their stories in a picture book, so as opposed to like how we grew up, is like completely night and day. But then the thing is, like, we are making strides.
Yeah, I feel like we are making strides, and I know it feels slow sometimes, but I think we have to remember that like 10 years ago, 15
there was nothing.
Ago, there was nothing. You know what I mean? And like, I have to be honest, I feel very fortunate in terms of where I'm at in media today, because like my stories always get the green light. You know, I have so far not really been in a position where it's been like, oh no, we can't have you write about that. That hasn't really happened, you know, but it has happened at previous jobs, even working in Latin media. So like, you know, even recently, like I'm even able to bring my own experiences. Like we spoke about, I did a personal essay recently for a package that I put out, which I was really, really excited about. It was called Embracing Soledad, and it went live 2 days before Valentine's Day. And I was really excited about it because I was like, you know what? There's been, as a fellow single woman who has chosen to be single over being in a relationship that's just going to ruin my life. There's been so many beautiful like single movements happening amongst women, but I don't, and even though I follow so many single Latinas that like talk about it and celebrate it, I don't see it in the stories. I don't see it in the celebrities. So I was like, yo, I'm gonna do a package on this because I know this exists, you know, and it included personal essays from single Latinas. I had someone do an op-ed about like, why aren't there more single Latina celebs, that really dived into how like as a culture, we still kind of see that as a failure. When we see a woman, especially over 30 or over 35, that's single and doesn't have kids, it's like, what happened to her? Like, girl, I can't tell you how many times I meet someone for the first time, and if it comes out that I'm single and then my age also comes up, it's like, pero ¿cómo va a ser? Tú estás tan buena moza y tú tienes tu carrera y todo, tú estás enterita. And it's like, what makes you think that there's something wrong with me?
Yeah.
Like, why is it so hard to believe that I've chosen this? And it's not that I'm not open for partnership. Like, I think partnership, when both people are aligned, and both people love and respect each other and share values and share goals, I think, you know, partnership is a beautiful thing. But if that's not easy to find, you know what I mean? Especially nowadays with social media and the dating apps. So the fact that you think that I'm single because I must be crazy.
Yeah.
Or there must be
or there's something intrinsically wrong with you that you're choosing singlehood as opposed to being a mother, and like,
te digo,
Dios
like,
te libre.
Even in 2024, el otro día I was shopping and I know the store owner, and he was like, ¿Cuándo tú te vas a casar? Like, when are you going to find somebody? And I was like, I don't know. I ask God that all the time. And he was like, you know, and then I had said, like, I'm not in a rush though, because since I don't want to have kids, I don't feel that pressure that I felt when I did want to have kids, which is why I did the biological clock essay. And he was like, but what are you going to do? Because everybody knows I'm close to my parents.
Yeah.
What are you going to do when your parents die? Like, I went home and I kind of like teared because I was like, oh my God, that was like,
that's so rude.
Like, what are you going to do when your parents die? You're going to be sad and lonely. And I had a friend say this to me, and I know his intentions were well, but I don't think people realize like how painful that is to say to someone, like, you're going to disappear. Basically, your life is going to be meaningless when you lose your parents. And it's like, no, I've built a community. I have friends, you know, I have close friends. I still have family. I have siblings. I have cousins. It doesn't end with like choosing not to have kids. Like, I think motherhood is so beautiful. I'd say like my three closest friends right now are moms. My sister's a mom, and the rest of them will probably become moms. You know what I mean? There's very few of us that don't want to do this. I think it's weird when people think that individuals that choose to live differently, it's because we don't respect parenthood. That's not what it is. We respect it so much, actually, and we observe all the love and the work that it entails, that we're like, that's beautiful. I don't think I want to work that hard at that. I think I want to put my energy in other things. And I really think that we need to come to a place in society where we're not threatened by people that are different. And we love and accept them and like learn from each other. I learn from my mom friends all the time. It's actually great having mom friends. They are so nurturing, like 100%, you know?
I always tend to be, because I feel like my friend group has gotten younger, especially being part of the social club. Like, I'm 40, and then my close friends are like in their 30s, right? Yeah. Yes, I do have friends that are like my age, obviously, but like a lot of them are younger than I am, and I end up being mother hen to them, and I actually appreciate that because I feel like they view my view of life is completely different than their view, and I can give them a different perspective, even though none of them have children yet. But yeah, like I feel like everybody's experience is different. Not everybody's cut out for motherhood. You know what I'm saying? And just because you can have children doesn't mean that you have to have kids.
And even if you did, because honestly, had I been a mom, I think I would have been terrific at it, to be honest. But I do think that there would have been a part of me that I wouldn't have resented my kid, but I definitely think there would have been a part of me that wasn't always happy, just because like I feel in many ways I'm just getting started, and other things I want to do. I think at one point I want to take screenwriting classes. I think at some point I'd like to like not live in New York temporarily because I feel like I'd always come back. There's just a different type of like, and my whole thing is like, because I've had people tell me, but like, what if you don't do those things? This is what people don't get about like people that don't want to have kids. Even if I don't do the things, right? I just want to know that I'm able to. I like having the option of, I like being able to choose. I like being able to have choice in a way that I know that in the early stages of motherhood, you might not have. And I think we have to just like embrace that, where we're at today, and embrace that this has become like a very normal thing in Latine culture, and stop thinking us like we're defective
aliens,
women.
You know what's funny though, Johanna, I'm gonna be 100% transparent with you. I was not one of those women that saw myself as a mom at all.
See, and then there's that too. Like, I feel like people change. I wanted to be a mom when I was younger. People change.
No, I was never like that girl that was like, "Oh my God, let me hold your baby."
I used to be like that girl either. My mom was.
I was always like, "Wow, your baby's so cute. Keep it over there." Like, I wasn't that person until I was married, and then like, I ended up being pregnant. Obviously, there was choices made, whatever, and yes, I decided to have a child, right? Would I do it again? No, I wouldn't. And people like, and they like to judge me, They're like, "Oh, pero ese niño se va a quedar solo. And what are you going to do when you're older? Who's going to take care of you?" I'm like, myself. I'm like, I make enough money that I can pay somebody to take care of me.
I love that you're keeping it 100, because that's actually one of the things that I love about this generation of moms, at least the ones that I surround myself with, is that type of honesty. I've had moms, I've had fathers tell me that, because the reality is that even if it's always been your dream to be a mom, which I was like you, to be honest, like I didn't want to have kids in my 20s, and then the biological clock started ticking when I was 28. So from 28 to 35, I wanted it, but I didn't really unpack why I wanted it. Like, I was never a kid person. I didn't really start appreciating kids till my 30s, and everybody started having kids around me. I'm still kind of awkward with kids, even though I love them. Like, I don't change diapers. I know my siblings think that's so weird. I don't change my niece and nephew's diapers. Like, it's a lot. You know what I mean? I don't babysit anyone that's not potty trained. Like, I'm not like, I wasn't that girl that was like, oh my God. Like, I wasn't even dreaming about my wedding when I was younger. I think I was actually like dreaming of being an adult when I was a kid. Like, I used to fantasize about being an adult and having like,
and being independent. Yeah.
I went through my Sex and the City fantasies. I wanted to be like Carrie Bradshaw before I realized she was toxic. So I think there's a lot more moms that are like you. And I think it's great that you're so honest about that, because like, there's no shame in that. And you shouldn't be shamed for that, and you shouldn't be judged for that. And honestly, anybody that judges you about that, that is a projection. That is 100% a projection of their own insecurities. It is not your problem.
Listen, and then like they're like, oh, ¿quién te va a cuidar cuando tú te viejo? Like, who's gonna take care of you when you're older? I'm like,
that's what people tell me.
Kids don't owe you shit. If you're having children because you want like a built-in nursing person, that is not guaranteed.
Listen, I told my mom today, because we're always talking about this, because her and my dad are getting older. They're still young though. My dad's 66, my mom's 64. No, she doesn't turn 65 this year. She's 63. So I told her, I was like, Mommy, like, you know, el día que ustedes se ponen más viejo, like, yo te voy a cuidar. Like, I want the responsibility. Like, I don't want my siblings to do it. I also don't even think it's fair to my siblings because they have kids. Yeah. And my mom was like, we don't want that. Like, we're trying to take care of our health or whatever. And I was like, I'm just saying, si algo pasa, like, I would like to, because I know you would do it for me. And we were talking about it, and I was saying how, like, I got into an argument with one of my homeboys earlier this week, because he was like, I think people that don't have kids are selfish or whatever. So I was like, what are your reasons for having kids? And he was like, oh, because, you know, I don't want to be sad and lonely, and I want somebody to take care of me when I'm older, and I want to like pass my legacy. And I was like, all those reasons are selfish. Once you become a parent, you become selfless. But your reasons for wanting to become a parent are just as selfish as my reasons for not wanting to become a parent. So why are you judging me?
Yeah, people are so messed up. Like, eso no está garantizado. Look, like let's say I had a kid and I wanted somebody to take care of me. I don't think Aiden will be able to do that when he's older.
Also, like, I think it's kind of like unfair. Like, it's one thing if your kid volunteers to do it, right? Like, my mom volunteered to take my grandma in. So my grandma lives with my parents. She's lived with my parents for decades now. It's another thing for your parents to be like, tú me vas a cuidar. You know what I mean? Like, what if your kid, like, I know people who have left the country. Like, what if your kid wants to move to Europe and
y esa presión, no.
No. For them to like not live out the life that they want to live because you had them so that they can take care of you, like that, like that's not on them. They didn't even ask to be born. Like,
exactly,
it's weird to me when I hear that.
It's like that's toxic. I don't even know if there's a term for it, but I feel like that's a toxic way of viewing children, because like your kids don't owe you shit.
They don't.
Like, they did not ask you to be born. So you expecting your child to take care of you just because you're their parent, that means nothing. Like, literally nothing. So yeah, no, people need to stop with that. I love
hearing this from a mom, by the way. Thank you.
Kids don't owe you shit. And yeah, no, like, I don't want to do it again. Like, there was a point that I was like, maybe, but then I'm like, no, that doesn't mean anything. Like, I feel so fulfilled in my life right now. And even being a single mom, I don't really particularly feel like I want to start changing diapers again when my child is like super independent. Like, I can be like, hey, baby, we're going to go out in an hour. I need you to get ready. And he'll just like hop in the shower and like get ready, pick out his outfit. Like, I don't have to do those things anymore. And it should be okay for me not to feel like starting over again either. Like, people need to be able to live and let live.
It's funny. So two things came to mind. One, I always say this, right? I love my siblings. If they listen to this, I love y'all. But there's something about being the oldest where you know you were alone. It was just you at one time, at one point. So I always said, like, if I would have been the only child, I would have been fine. I would have been 100% fine. So when I see, like, no judgment, but when I see women really pressuring themselves to have more because they're like, oh, I'm doing it for the kid. You ain't doing it for the kid. Just admit to yourself that you're doing it for yourself because you want to have a big family. And that's totally fine. But you're not really doing the kid any favors because actually, if you're the only child, all your money and your attention goes to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I have a good relationship with my sibling, but do you know how many people I know that don't? So I'm like, I think it's okay to be a little selfish when it comes to, like, I don't want to have more, which is why I find it so weird. I see some of my friends already venting to me about, like, can you believe Fulanita is asking me when I'm having the second one and my kid is only like 5 months old, like, let me breathe? I don't understand why people do that, but I do think that everything that humans do is just a freaking projection.
Ay. And another thing is, like, I remember as the oldest, when my mom decided to have another child, I was like, 3 kids, that's a lot. Like, in my brain, obviously I would never say that to my mom. Yeah. But, like, I'm like, that's a lot. Like, we don't fit. Like, before we used to be able to just, like, go in my aunt's family and, like, she had 2 and we were 2 and it was, like, 4 kids all together plus the adults. Like, we would fit anywhere. But, like, now that we have 3 children and we were well-behaved kids, for kids, obviously. But, like, now that we're, like, 3 of us now, we have to, like, overthink everything. And everything's more expensive. I was thinking about this as a 12 and 13-year-old. Can you imagine? Like, I wouldn't want to put that pressure on another child. And, yeah, like, if they want to play with somebody, my son has cousins. Like, we don't, not cousins of his own, but, like, he has cousins that are my cousins that are small or younger that he can hang out with whenever he wants. Like, plus he's more of a, because he's by himself, I feel like he's not like a typical only child, but he can play with others, but also he's cool with, like, being on his own and, like, doing his own thing.
You know how amazing it is to learn how to be alone when you're a kid? I had to learn that as an adult. I had to learn at 28 years old, when I came out of, like, a long-term relationship, how to feel comfortable with my own company. I'm so glad that I learned it in my late 20s, because it really helped me survive my 30s and it really helped me not settle just for the sake of being in a relationship. So I'm glad that I learned that lesson early enough. But so many people are not comfortable being alone. And a lot of people that I personally know that have always been comfortable being alone have been only children because they have to kind of learn how to navigate that at a young age. So I think that's definitely a strength. The other thing I was going to say that came up was, people could do whatever they want, right? Like, I want people to have kids, to be honest. We need more people on this planet, but also, like, people having kids makes it easy for people like me to exist, right? There's no pressure. This is not Handmaid's Tale. Like, I could choose not to have kids. But jokes aside, it has made me think a lot about the decisions we make, how so many of the decisions we make, and I'm speaking very specifically from a Latine perspective since, for the podcast, but I think this is a human thing. So many of the decisions that we make in our lives are for other people. And I don't realize that. Like, I can't tell you how many guys have DM me, friends, strangers, to be like, yo, or even just told me hanging out when they find out I don't want to have kids. I always, again, there are the ones that are like, you're going to die alone. But then there's also the ones that are like, yo, I don't think I really want to have kids either. I just don't know how mommy's going to take it. And it's sometimes it's Latinos that are the only child of a single mom. And they feel like having a child would, like, bring their mom the happiness and joy that they don't currently have. And again, I'm not saying this is not my problem, but I hear that and it kind of breaks my heart because it's like, yo, your mom needs to find that joy for herself.
Yes.
Not be making such a huge decision like that to make your mom happy. That's crazy. That's crazy.
And having the grandchild is not going to guarantee their happiness. What if they don't get along?
Right. And even outside of having kids, because that's just one big decision. You know how many people I know that were lawyers or worked in finance or business that eventually left that and became entrepreneurs or pursued their passions, because the only reason why they were lawyers or in finance or in business or whatever is because that was their parents' dream for them.
No
Like,
way.
so much of the shit that we do is to make other people happy. That was one of the questions I asked myself when I was 35. And I was like, my mom was like, should we freeze your eggs? I had the money saved or whatever. And it really helped me that my parents were like, you don't got to do this, right? Like, our love is not conditional. We don't care if you become a parent or not. We literally just want to see you happy. And like, at that point, I think my brother was already a father. So that helped that they already had a grandchild. But it was also like this weight that came off me, because one of my many reasons for wanting to be a parent in the first place was to make my parents proud. That's it.
Wow. That is bananas. And like, I love that you said it, because like a lot of the things that we do is just because we don't have an actual reason for wanting to do these things. It's because that's what's expected of us, and that's what we've seen for I don't know, eons and centuries or whatever. Whenever the modern family thing like became an actual thing that people do, that you have to have children. But yeah, no, I like, wow. I feel like there's nothing else that we should.
But it's not just the kid thing. It's like so many things that
Yeah, so many decisions.
Even for our partners. Like, I had someone reach out to me recently, because I was like, yo, I think I'm gonna start a group, which is like, people that don't want to have kids so that we don't feel like aliens. And it was crazy because everyone that reached out is Latine, men and women. We're like, me up. So I'm gonna start this on WhatsApp and then make it like in real life. But I had a young woman reach out to me and tell me like, I never wanted to have kids. I told my partner this from the jump. He said he was cool with it, and now we're struggling because he really wants it, and we don't want to break up. But I told him from the get-go like that I didn't want to do this, and he said he thought I was going to change my mind.
That's unfair too, because like, if a person is telling you what they want or what they do not want, do not expect getting into a relationship that you're going to change who that person is and their decisions in life. Because like, we are adults. Like, there's nothing. If I tell you no for something, it means no. Like, my mind is not going to change. Like, especially with things like that. That's like, como te digo, like real life decisions that influence you in different ways, and changing your mind about that is not something that's just going to happen from one day to the next.
Exactly. And what I was telling her, because I think what was coming up for her, and I'm really proud of her, she was like, I'm not gonna do that for him, because that's not what I want. That's not gonna make me happy. And I really respect that, because so many people do the things to make other people happy, and then they resent the person, and then nobody's happy. And again, not just with kids, with a lot of different milestones and big decisions. But I really think that we need to hit a point in society, but again, when we're talking about our communities, to just kind of sit with things and ask ourselves, do I really want that? Or is that something that I've been raised or conditioned to feel like I need to do to be complete, right? Like, I really would love to be married one day. Again, I don't know if it's going to happen, because yo no lo voy a hacer con cualquier hombre, right? Like, this really has to be like my soulmate. Like, it has to feel right. I would like to be married one day. I totally believe in marriage. I even believe in the institution, to be honest. And I'm not afraid of divorce. If I get divorced, I get divorced. But there are people that marriage is not natural for them. And that is fucking okay.
Yes.
That is absolutely okay. If anything, if you don't inherently believe this and you go marrying someone that does, you're going to ruin that person's life. And
Yeah.
your own, because this is not part of your own value system.
Yeah.
You know?
And I feel like a lot of people date and they ask these questions, but then they feel like, well, they'll change their mind later on. No, like, well, about things like that. Maybe somebody will change their mind about pineapple on pizza, but changing your mind about something so, like, important like that rarely happens. So please don't go dating people thinking that you're gonna change their mind and you're gonna be the thing that's gonna be like, oh my god, she wants to have kids, she wants to have a family now because of XYZ. No.
And I'm not telling you that it can't happen, right? Because I've seen people change their minds about a lot of things, about marriage, about commitment, about children. But like you shouldn't get into a relationship with the hopes
expecting that,
because it's unlikely. It could, but it's unlikely. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh my God, Johanna, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so happy that you accepted.
I feel like we need to hang out after this.
Yeah, definitely.
This was really fun. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm going to end the show how I usually end it, which is follow me at Comadreando Pod. And you can follow Johanna at, can you please drop your handles?
So my handle is cup_of_Johanna, JOHANNA. That's my IG handle. I forgot my TikTok handle, so I'm going to have to send that to you.
It's okay. I'll include it in the show notes. And comadres, you know that if you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me a Comadre-Gram via email at Marcy@comadreandopod.com or slide up into my DMs. Please visit our website, www.comadreandopod.com, to read our latest blog posts, find out about future events, and get your official Comadre merch. And I want to thank Johanna. She's now an official Comadre of the show.
I want merch. I love merch.
I'll send you a couple of options and you let me know what you need. So that is pretty much it for today, comadres. I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Hello, comadre.
Hey, comadre.
Do you have a minute for comadre time?